PhD Journey Unplugged podcast. On this podcast, Dr. Gordon and Dr. Ward draw on their experiences from their PhD journeys to explore health, wellness, and human performance. After completing our doctorates in leadership with a focus on health and human performance, we both realized how many valuable lessons we learned on the journey towards that finish line. After we graduated, we also discovered that there were few spaces for new doctoral graduates to share their research or discuss their experiences on mental, physical, or social emotional level. So we decided to leverage our experiences, knowledge, and academic training to start this podcast, share our voices on topics related to wellness, healthy aging, and purposeful living, and strive to help others achieve their goals with good health. Dr. Sarah Gordon has a background in psychology. Her research interests focus on exercise motivation with older adult athletes. Dr. Gordon is a freelance writer for Outside Interactive, writing for Triathlete magazine, as well as a published poet, photographer, and multi-sport enthusiast. She is returning to school to study neuroscience through the University of Pennsylvania online certification program. Dr. Marilyn Ward is the founder and owner of No Excuses LLC, a leading health and wellness coaching company. She has over 25 years of combined experience in wellness, leadership, and motivational coaching, including 6 years of dedicated service in the United States Air Force. She brings her expertise and discipline to her mission. Dr. Ward's research focuses on enhancing the quality of life and increasing longevity in aging adults. We are both passionate advocates for helping others thrive towards better health and value connecting deeply with our audiences. We strive to empower individuals to take charge of their health, make lasting changes, and transform their lives from the inside out. Thank you for taking the time to listen to our podcast. All information and opinions expressed in this podcast are for general purposes only and should not be taken as professional advice. Hello, and welcome back to the PhD Journey Unplugged podcast. I am Dr. Marilyn Ward, and this is my colleague, Dr. Sarah Gordon. And as you see, we have another special guest today. Dr. Gordon, would you like to introduce our guest?
Absolutely. We are absolutely honored to have our former classmate, our friend, and our colleague, Dr. Gregory Gibbons. Thank you so much for being here today with us on episode 18. And we're going to talk about exhaustion to being energized and talk about how burnout comes into play with that. So I'm first going to introduce, and is it okay if it's Greg on the podcast?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay.
But you're a doctor.
He
I
is
just saw
actually a
this on
medical.
some,
Yes, he's the
he had
medical.
another show on, yeah, and it was
Yes.
they called him Doc because he had a PhD and his MD, and I'm like, oh, that's kind of catchy.
Yes, he
Never
is
do
a
that
double
though.
doctor, a doctor, and a great friend. I'm so happy to have you here. So Dr. Gibbons Greg is a physician, academic, and lifelong athlete dedicated to advancing men's health, performance, and longevity through evidence-based lifestyle medicine. With over 2 decades of experience, he combines clinical excellence with personal discipline to guide patients towards high-functioning, purpose-driven lives. He is a 16-time Ironman finisher. I just have to let that sit for a second.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Haven't even done one yet.
Yes.
Two has, but
Talking
now
about a high-performance individual. We have him here today. He's done the prestigious Ironman World Championship in Kona, Hawaii, and he's a multi-time Boston Marathon qualifier. Dr. Gibbons is no stranger to physical and mental endurance. These accomplishments are more than athletic milestones. They reflect his commitment to discipline, resilience, and the science of human performance. He applies these same principles in clinical practice, helping his patients regain energy, optimize hormone balance, and design habits that drive sustainable health. Dr. Gibbons holds a bachelor's degree in sports medicine, a master's in athletic training. He's a doctor of medicine, board certified in emergency medicine, and most recently completed his doctorate, his PhD in health and human performance. His research explores how lifestyle choices, exercise, nutrition, sleep, and recovery affect occupational effectiveness, longevity, and quality of life, particularly in high stress positions. At the core of his philosophy is the belief that health is not merely the absence of disease, but the foundation for thriving. And I love that. He
Yeah.
is passionate about building systems of accountability and transformation and partnering with his patients to create the physical, emotional, and spiritual capacity to exceed their expectations. And Greg, I say this with just the utmost respect and truthfulness that you are probably the most positive, hardworking human being I've ever met in my life. You always inspired me, and I'm just incredibly grateful to have you on our show today.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for having me. It was quite the mouthful. So I'm happy to be here. Happy to share my experience, with what I've gone through in my life and how the science of health and human performance has become integrated in my day-to-day life. And this is something that's grown over years and years, dating back to when I was a youngster. I grew up in a rural Ohio, and I didn't really have much, other than just the sense of community that I gained from athletic endeavors, and I gained a lot of my identity through that. And so it became natural when I was going to college that I was going to pursue something along those lines. And my journey was kind of convoluted. I went straight through for my bachelor's and master's degree and worked as an athletic trainer for a few years before I went back to medical school, and then decided that I was going to pursue emergency medicine. And I worked in emergency medicine for a few years, and life got lifey. It really got challenging. Not necessarily because the occupation was all that challenging, because truthfully, physicians do have everybody's got hard jobs. That's the bottom line. Everybody's got hard jobs. No matter what they do, they're being pushed. The landscape for where we are and what we're doing. It doesn't matter what your field of work is, everything's becoming more efficient and more challenged. And so people's jobs are hard no matter what they do. But I found that, evolving over time, my life got kind of unbalanced, and I think that that's really what burnout is. And so I had a lot of experience with burnout, probably about 10 years ago. My life just, my job was really challenging, and I was not very happy at work, but I found that I was not happy at home either. You know, um, I was keenly aware of what burnout was. I felt it
Yeah.
every day. Every day when I went to work, it was a challenge, and I had the cardinal signs. I was always exhausted. Medical professionals, part of our speak is cynicism. One of the hallmarks of burnout. And of course, you always get to that point where you're like, what am I doing? What's my purpose here? I'm
Yeah.
just a cog in the wheel, and I don't really have anything. And so I was feeling profound burnout, and my life was really challenging, and I was experiencing a lot of the causes and conditions associated with burnout. And through a series of trials and errors and lifestyle changes, I started to get some original thoughts on burnout, and so I kind of dove into it a little bit. And so when I started my PhD, I kind of wanted to go down that path. Remember when we started, we were in the heart of COVID,
Yes.
and burnout in COVID was kind of it was an interesting phenomena that occurred with COVID. But um, when I started I remember my position statement when I applied to the program. We have to write that little letter.
Right.
It was that's what it was all about. It was all about burnout and COVID and how it was affecting my life and that sort of thing. And so I think, like many of us, I kind of waxed and waned with what my topic was, kind of what my area of interest was going to be, what I was
Can
going
I
to
say
become a
one thing?
content.
Can I
Yeah,
say one
absolutely.
thing? I remember one of our first classes together was philosophy of scientific knowledge, right? And you're right, we started
Hmm.
August 2020. And I remember in one of your posts early on, um, and I don't think we can fully understand what it was like to be in the emergency room during COVID, but I got the sense like it was just surviving it, you know,
It was total chaos.
chaos.
It was total chaos.
So it's interesting because, when we talk about your dissertation, and I'm going to read the title of your dissertation, but it's almost like you lived what you ended up researching. You lived the burnout to a higher degree because of COVID. So I think that's interesting how life experiences, our paths, how we sometimes we live the things that we end up then, you know, becoming experts in on a different level. So let
Mhm.
me just go ahead and read your title of your dissertation. Then we're going to dive deeper into understanding what burnout is. So the title of your dissertation was Emergency Medicine, Physician Exercise Compliance, Burnout, Quality of Life, and Career Longevity. So as you were writing your position statement and entering the program and working through the courses, at what point did you start to kind of formulate this idea for your dissertation?
Um,
Or did you
Emergency
know all
medicine,
along?
yeah, so emergency medicine is interesting in that we have the highest rate of burnout of any occupation. That's
Due due to
they come up
hours?
with
Due to hours or due to
we'll,
like
we'll
what you're
talk about
dealing
that.
with?
We'll talk
Yeah.
about that.
Okay.
Everything.
Um,
Yeah, I'm
yeah,
like,
no, it's interesting. And it goes back to essentially the beginning of when a burnout was really starting to be measured in medicine. A little bit of history about burnout. It was first described, I think, in the mid 1970s. It was first described, and then I think Grudenberger actually described it in the mid 70s, and then Christina Maslach in the late 70s and early 80s really took it by chance. She's kind of the mother of burnout. She was a social
mhm.
psychologist, and she took some observations. That's what she did. She looked at behaviors, and she I think it was social workers that she drew the initial definitions of burnout out of. And what she did was she looked at the at burnout and or she looked at occupational behaviors, and she came up with a theory that emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and a lack of purpose was really what these people were, the characteristics that they were displaying. And then she took it upon herself to apply. I think there were several. I think there were six total um, things that she attributed it to it, and they were all about the workplace. It was, lack of autonomy, lack of reward, financial fairness, values, that sort of thing. That she said people are exhausted because of this that is happening to them in the workplace, and that's really become our colloquial definition of burnout through, I mean, the last 40 years now. That's how we define burnout, as this syndrome of emotional exhaustion, cynicism, and lack of purpose. And she then developed the Maslach burnout inventory, which has been used worldwide as the kind of the gold standard for measuring burnout. And it's a relatively straightforward thing that it hasn't been applied to everything. And so when I started to look at burnout, I thought, okay, well, this is all being caused by the job. And I found that that wasn't my experience. My experience, it had more to do with how I was showing up to work. And so in my job, when I'm there, I work really hard. It's a physically, emotionally, intellectually challenging endeavor. But we're trained for that. That's the bottom line. We're trained for that. We're trained over 8 years to do that job, and the job is not particularly hard. Whenever you're trained to do it. If you took a person that wasn't doing that and you put them in that situation, it would be very stressful. But the reality of it is my job is my job. That's what I was doing. So if I was coming off of some time off or a vacation, I would go to work and nothing would bother me. Nothing. I mean, you couldn't, the processes, the problems, everything that we were attributing to this. I found that I could be in a very good state, and none of it bothered me. But then if I was tired, I hadn't been sleeping well, I hadn't been working out, man, I was just miserable. I absolutely couldn't tolerate any of the nonsense that I was having to deal with. And so as I started looking to burn out a little bit, we started to look at some of the causes and conditions. And so if you ask physicians, and most of the research today shows that burnout is caused by the stuff that we do in the workplace. And a lot of it's like the electronic medical record, it's hospital metrics, it's insurance regulations, it's prior authorizations, it's all these things. And I thought, okay, well, that all makes sense because these are the challenges of our job. And so then I started to peel back the layers a little bit, and I went back to the original data that we had on burnout.
Mhm.
And we first started collecting data on burnout in medicine in the early 2000s. Believe it or not, it had been described for about 20 years before we started to get some reliable data. And so I think around 2002, we started to get the first data, and they found that about 50% of physicians were burnout. And I was like, okay, well, that's interesting. Over the course of 20 years, we really haven't made much of a mark. It hasn't gotten a lot worse. Some years it's better and some years it's a little worse, but it's by and large about 50% of physicians are burnt out. It's like, okay, well, at least it hasn't gotten worse. And but then I was like, wait a minute. I practiced medicine 20 years ago. The EMR didn't exist.
Oh,
Insurance regulations didn't exist. Metrics didn't exist. The top 10 things that we attribute to burnout today in the workplace didn't exist 20 years ago, but yet the burnout was still 50%. I'm like, okay, well, maybe something else is in play here. Then I started to look at some of the data on other occupations and I thought, oh, wow, 50% of lawyers are burnout. 50% of pilots are burnout. 50% of teachers are burnout. 50% of moms are burnout.
50% of PhD students are burned out. I don't know if that's actually
Depending on where they are in their PhD journey, it can actually be higher than that. So I mean that made sense to me. I was like, okay, well, wait a minute. This doesn't have anything to do with the occupation, right? I mean, if
right.
every occupation has a burnout rate of 50%, and the things that we primarily attribute to burnout didn't exist 20 years ago, and it was still 50%, then maybe this model's wrong. Okay. Maybe the things that Christine Maslach observed were very real behaviors, and maybe that's what burnout is, and that could be somewhat arguable as well. But maybe her attributions were wrong. Okay, so maybe she looked at these behaviors in the workplace, and everything that she attributed it to it, the workload, the lack of autonomy, the lack of reward, all that sort of stuff, wasn't what actually was causing this. And so I was like, okay, well, what is causing it then? So then I went back to myself and I was like, okay, well, when I'm feeling most burnout, what does that look like? And I'm like, I'm always tired. I'm not sleeping, I'm not doing these sort of things. And so I'm like, okay, well, does burnout follow lifestyle disorders? And so then I started to look at lifestyle disorders, obesity, um, hypertension, hyperlipidemia, all these things that lack of community, all these sorts of things. I was like, okay, well, maybe there's a connection there. And when I looked at that, I couldn't really extrapolate any of the data because we didn't have enough data points going past. So in 20 years, you can't really see a huge difference in lifestyle disorders, believe it or not. I mean, they're getting worse, but I couldn't really do anything. So I'm like, okay, well, that doesn't make much sense. So I can't really look at that data. And so as I started to look at it more and more, I thought, okay, well, maybe what is causing this burnout is not related to the occupation at all. And so I started to look at it a little bit with my PhD work. Okay, so we all at some point during this journey on our PhD were exhausted,
Yes.
cynical. We all asked ourselves, why am I doing this?
Yes.
Why am I doing this? This is silly. Well, that's a symptom of burnout, right? So that's the third cardinal symptom of burnout is that lack of purpose piece. And of course, we all got cynical. Cynicism was one of our languages that we used during our PhD journey. And of course, we were all exhausted depending on what we were trying to do. And so as a PhD student, I experienced burnout.
I like to say that for most of us, we didn't have the luxury of that was like the main thing in our lives. It was kind of, we were doing our PhD around our lives.
Yeah.
Right? We were fitting it in around everything else. So, I think that added to like the mental fatigue and exhaustion. I just want to say real quick, and because you talked about autonomy, I found this one research article. There were 990 participants. That's a lot of participants, and they had a 47% response rate. So that's pretty good, response to the survey that they gave to PhD students. And they found, just like you're talking about, lack of sleep was like the main reason, for burnout. So this fatigue that you're talking about, they ran the study within self-determination theory, which is the theoretical framework I ran my study within. And you talk about the basic psychological needs of autonomy, competence, and relatedness. So, to feel like you have a sense of autonomy, to feel like you're competent in what you're doing, and that in terms of relating it to your life, being sleep deprived is really, really can set you up for some serious mental health issues, physical health issues, cognitive health issues. I mean, so many. So I love that you just kind of, as we're talking about your research, you're focusing in on this fatigue factor. And it's interesting because I think it's important as we continue our conversation, talking about your research and how it relates to burnout, is in how do we kind of, if it's fatigue, it's not necessarily occupational related, how do we distinguish it from depression and other like clinical, mental health issues? Like how do we focus, like how do we know it's burnout? And Brett and Marilyn, feel
I
free
think they're
to.
distinctive individuals. Yeah, I think they're distinctive entities. Depression is not burnout. Burnout is not depression. You can have depression with burnout. You can have depression without burnout. You can. I think depression is a. I have some very specific views. I have some very interesting views of depression. Obviously, it's an incredibly complex
Right.
um, with multiple contributors, multiple signs and symptoms, and things like that. Depression is a state of helplessness, hopelessness that usually comes with a disconnect between the life you lead, the life you think you need. It's a disconnect with expectations and that sort of thing. And of course, there's neurochemical, neurobiological components of that certainly contribute. But I don't think that burnout, that feeling of exhaustion, is necessarily a low level dysthymia or a low level depression. I would think that based on where you are and your other things that are going on in your life, I think that burnout can lead to depression. And of course, depression could absolutely lead to burnout to a certain degree, but I think that they're distinct entities, but not disconnected, if that
Right.
makes sense.
No, that
I
makes
think
a lot of
it's
sense.
true.
Go ahead,
Yeah,
Marilyn.
'cause I think you see that in a lot in everything, right? If you look at obesity, you have all these factors that go to that, but then some of those same factors also go to like what you're saying, or like if you look at diabetes, well, poor health, poor eating, but sleep. I've been seeing more and more research talking about sleep and fatigue and how, and all, like you said, the exhaustion, the burnout. But I think it's really hard. You can't narrow it down to just one thing. There's, like you said, there's so many other contributing factors to all of these different ailments, illnesses, diseases. So, yeah, interested to
But
hear
let me
more.
let
So
me
yeah, so I can get into a little bit of that. I've created a burnout hierarchy that will talk about the things that contribute to it, and most importantly, what we can do about it. That's really
Right.
what I'm interested in. I'm interested in this translational research where we can say, okay, this is what we got going on. This is what the next step is. This is how we address it. In burnout, it's interesting because everything is contributed to the occupation. Most of our burnout remedies, most of our burnout solutions are really designed to address some of those things that we have in the workplace. And in medicine, I sit on a wellness committee. I talk about this stuff, and everything revolves around making these modifications in the workplace to make the job, quote, easier. And we've learned over the last 20 years of trying to implement these changes in the workplace that it makes absolutely no difference on burnout as a role. And that also led me to think that maybe potentially, yeah, what we're barking up the wrong tree when it comes to burnout. And so there was a couple pieces of literature that I read early on that made me think that perhaps this idea of burnout was related to lifestyle, and not related to the workplace at all. Everywhere I looked, I saw that burnout causes poor lifestyle, it causes poor sleep, it causes poor exercise habits, it causes poor relationships, it leads to divorce and substance abuse and all this stuff. And I was like, okay, well, maybe this is two-sided. Maybe it's this lifestyle, it's the poor sleep, it's the lack of exercise, it's the poor relationships, it's the alcohol use, it's all that sort of stuff that's not being caused by the burnout, but it's causing burnout. And so you have to, I kind of flipped it on its end and said, okay, well, maybe this is not what we're actually looking at. We're looking at a different beast here. And then as I started to look through the literature, I thought, okay, well, what percentage of, at the time, a physician burnout rate was around 67%. And the only literature that I could find on exercise compliance was in physicians and attending physicians was 37%. I was like, well, that's a coincidence. That's a coincidence that 37% of physicians meet the exercise requirements and 67% are burnout. So I was like, okay, well, maybe there's a link between exercise compliance and burnout. And then that kind of grew its own legs. I wanted to see, what these connections were. And that ultimately led to my research project at CUC, which was looking at exercise compliance with physicians. I took the MBI, which is the Maslach Burnout Inventory. I found 100 emergency physicians specifically. And asked them to give me I asked them about their exercise compliance. I asked them
Greg, one
about their
thing.
lifestyle.
Were they within your hospital system, or was it
No,
across hospital systems?
it was across hospital systems. It was across the country. It was largely
Okay.
driven by word of mouth. It was driven by social media. It was driven by, and it was,
That's awesome.
I thought I was going to have a problem getting it, and I got over 100 in less than 24 hours. So people were
Wow.
chomping at the bit to give me the data, and for the most part, the data was all complete. I was very pleased. I was a little bit anxious trying to go into that data collection. It was like, okay, well, how long is this going to take? Am I going to have to beg people? They weren't very motivated to do it because I didn't have, a lot of I didn't have anything to give them. But my N, I needed 81 surveys in order to meet my N, and I got over 100, and I actually closed it. I probably could have gotten a lot more, and and perhaps looking back on it, I should have done more, because quite honestly, crunching the data for 100 versus 500 was not different. But I think that it would have made some of my data a little bit more meaningful if I had gone for that larger N, because I saw some trends but didn't meet significance. And so perhaps in the future I can do some of that stuff. So I wanted to see how burnout was affected by their lifestyle. So I used a lifestyle inventory to take a look at people's emotional, physical, environmental health, that sort of thing. And then I wanted to know to what degree this was impacting their desire to continue to do their job. So one of the big things that we came out of COVID is we had a lot of doctors quit.
Hmm.
Just
Interesting.
walk away,
Yeah,
just
too much.
legitimately quit medicine altogether. And emergency medicine is no exception to that rule. In fact, emergency medicine burnout is highest.
Do you
We
think it was lack of sleep from COVID? I mean, just hypothesizing.
no, it's not the job, it's our lifestyles. And so one thing, if you look at the top third of physicians, and we've got pretty good data on it. If you look at the top three specialties in medicine that suffer the highest burnout rates, they all have one thing in common: it's a very poor lifestyle. Flip that, go to the bottom end, and you look at things like dermatology and ophthalmology, where these people work 9 to 5, 4 days a week. They have the lowest burnout rate. Are their jobs easier? No, they're not easier.
Hmm.
But those people at the top, oftentimes for emergency medicine, our burnout rate is very high. It's multifactorial, of course, but we work nights, we work weekends, we work holidays, we work overnight, we work mid-shift. It doesn't matter. And so we always have an excuse not to make good choices. And so we suffer, and our it's really bad in emergency medicine for women. About 50% of all medical students now, actually more than 50%, are women, and they are better doctors. Every stretch of every time they've looked at results, women physicians are better. And more than 50% of all medical students now are female, and the graduates are therefore female. But we have an attrition rate for our female physicians that is abysmal. And when I say that, I'm saying that almost 50% of emergency medicine female physicians do not practice full time at 5 years. Okay. 20% of them don't practice at all. They literally don't practice at all. So we are losing so many of our female physicians early on to burnout. And it's not because they can't handle the job. In fact, they're better at it. But what they're being asked to do is make sacrifices with child rearing. They're being asked to miss things like soccer games, being there for their kids. They're having to make the choice between having children, which they've already put off, mind you.
Right.
These
Right.
are all 35-year-old females that are having to make the choice between living a lifestyle of the physician, or emergency physician, or raising their kids, getting their
Right.
kids to school, having dinner with their kids.
Hmm.
Um, I that's an important that's a very important factor. Okay, so we don't most physicians don't get time off to have kids. Okay, they don't get maternity leave. They don't get where the vast majority of doctors don't aren't afforded that, and we don't give them time off to a physician can't if your kid's sick at school, that doctor can't go get their kid.
Right.
They can't do it. They can't walk away. There's no way I can possibly leave my job for any reason. I can't.
Greg, I
And so
have,
In the
they're having.
military, we can do that.
well, I have a
Yeah.
note here. It says doctors and nurses basically sacrifice themselves for others.
That is
And it's kind of like
They're
the
sacrificing
self-sacrifice
they're sacrificing themselves for the job
for
is
the
what they're
job.
doing.
Yeah.
And so there's kind of like this idea of self-sacrifice. I mean, I don't have research on it or, I haven't looked at it, but I wonder if this kind of mentality of self-sacrifice, I mean, you have to kind of put others first as an ER physician. Does that set you up for burnout? It's just I wonder, kind of like that kind of way of going through life. Are you just inherently setting yourself up for these tough decisions that play on our emotions, like, doing the best job you can possibly do, right, in your
Yeah.
occupation versus like wanting to be there for your children for important moments in their lives. Those are hard decisions, and so
So here's my theory on this whole thing. So why do physicians have higher burnout than anybody else? It's because we've made them that way. Okay.
okay,
From the beginning. Okay. What do you have to do in order to get into medical school? You have to sacrifice,
yes,
right? You
a
have to
lot.
do things a lot. When you're in medical school, what do you have to do? You have to sacrifice. Okay. What we do to our residents, which is after you graduate from medical school, you go into your specialty training and you become a resident, and they graciously limit you to 100 hours a week. 80 hours
A lot.
clinically, but they graciously limit you to twice what a normal person works. And so by no coincidence, residents have the absolute highest burnout rate, particularly late residents, third, fourth, fifth year residents have exceedingly high burnout rates, and it's because their lifestyle is truly horrific. We've made them that way. That's how we roll. They call them
Right.
residents because they call them residents because they never leave the hospital. Okay, they literally are residents there.
Is that to
Um,
teach them? I feel like it's hazing. Is that like hazing, or that's literally because they need to learn what it's like to be on it? Like, what is it? If they see this burnout is happening and the attrition rate is terrible, why not change that practice?
we're trying,
Good
and a
question,
lot of it is
Marilyn.
history. A lot of it's history. That's how it was done before
That's how it's
us.
done.
And so there's a lot of research that goes into why is medical school 4 years? Can it be less? Why is residency so long? And it really comes down to competence, right? And that's what they usually typically anchor on. In order for a physician to be ready to practice independently as an attending physician, they have to have a certain degree of experience, and they feel like this is the amount of experience that they need in order to do it. And so we go through this. We're creating this environment that you give up everything. I mean, I would go weeks. I'm talking weeks and weeks without talking to my mom, who I talk to almost every day. Weeks, like you go completely off the map. There's absolutely nothing that you can do in that situation. You don't go on vacation. There's no such thing. And so these physicians are made this way. That's how we made this lifestyle for these guys and gals that is utterly unsustainable.
Well, let me
And
ask
so
you a quick
then
let me ask you a quick question because we all have our doctorates in health and human performance, and we know how important physical activity is in managing everything, right? Cognitive health, mental health, physical health, social emotional health. where does that come into this whole conversation about being high performing human beings, right? ER physicians are expected to perform at a much higher level. And I'd love for you to talk a little bit about the impact of cortisol because because you have the sustained level of stress that you have to learn how to manage. And we also know physiologically that that type of being under that type of stress for that long period of times has an impact too in terms of burnout and all the other things that we're talking about. But how do you see physical activity and whether you're a medical student, a PhD student, wherever you are in your life, right? We know the benefits of physical activity. How does that help you manage the things that we're talking about? And did you find any connection in your research with that?
So I'm a firm believer in physical activity. It's a big part of my life. It's a big part of my philosophy for life. I think that physical activity is multifaceted. I think that there is to some degree about capacity. I routinely get 20,000 steps a day when I'm at work, and an 8 to 10 hour. I constantly walk and I never sit down. So there's a physical component to it. The fitter you are, the more you're going to fatigue less, of course, which obviously has a component of that exhaustion piece. I think that anybody that has spent any time doing physical activity understand the emotional aspect of it. Nothing's more meditative for me than to
Right.
go for a nice 5 or 10 mile run. I mean, that's my happy place. My running shoes are my therapist, for
Yeah,
sure.
right there.
Um, and of
Like
course,
that.
there's obviously plenty of research that describes the cognitive benefits of physical activity. I think the most of the impact of physical activity is unarguable. It absolutely is a key component to lifestyle. And there's plenty of literature that links it.
Mhm.
I don't know that it's causative, but I do believe that it does. Maintaining your physical activity is a cornerstone of health and wellness, along with several other factors that I think will contribute to burnout and ameliorating the impact of burnout than a pizza party or changing something in your work environment will. So physical activity, I did look at it in my research, and I think that was one of the key. I did not see in my research, I did not see a direct link between um, physical activity and burnout, which was a little bit interesting.
That is
And it,
interesting.
it kind of it kind of went along with, and I think it had to do with my N. I think that it trended towards significance, but it never reached it.
Mhm.
In particular with physical exhaustion. And I looked at exercise compliance through the traditional ACSM model of 115 minutes of moderate activity a week, and actually looked at strength training as well. Strength training compliance did have clinical significance against emotional exhaustion, and that was an interesting piece. But
That's
physical activity,
interesting.
whether it be moderate or vigorous physical activity, did not show a direct link. Although they did trend towards significance, they did not reach it.
So
And so that that was
strength
an
training
interesting.
did, not
And
necessarily
strength training did.
aerobic
No.
endurance but strength training. That's interesting. We talked about that on a past episode about what going to the gym and kind of like that very linear lifting weights. It's just a very like lift weights, see the results.
Right.
I would really like to dive into that, why that strength training showed up more significant in your research. That's interesting.
Yeah, I don't know
That's your next
there
study.
it would be the there I think it could have been chance. I don't know. I don't
So
know that
interesting.
I mean there's another reasons why it should impact it, but I don't know that my research necessarily was
Right.
able to glean any light on saying this is what, that's more in your wheelhouse of qualitative data to figure out why people
Yeah.
feel like their lifestyles are impacted more as a result of strength training. Of course, I'm a firm believer in it in every aspect, and what it brings to my life. So
But they always
it's
say strong body, strong mind. I know it's kind of, oversimplifies this conversation, but you just wonder, if you think about the military, like Marilyn was in the Air Force.
Hmm.
And, strong body, strong mind. That was the mindset in there. Discipline.
Yeah, we were
Yeah.
forced to do our work. We were forced to have PT. So,
Yeah.
and the Air Force is different. And, they tease us all the time, the other branches, because we were like, our PT is definitely not as difficult as some of the others, like especially Marines and Army had a really, really tough. But and there's no comparison, obviously, between serving your patients, serving your country. Like I don't want to think anyone is either better than the other. But I will say, like we made those sacrifice. We sacrificed for our country. But in the Air Force, I will say it was a little bit. Um, I was able to have maternity leave when I had my children. We had 30 days of PTO for the whole year. You could take whenever. But I will say when you're deployed, different story.
Hmm.
Different story when you're deployed, and that's 3 months, 6 months, year, different, but that's why I'm like it's so mind-blowing to me that at the hospital it's not like that, or
But
that,
Mar
as a
but
physician.
Marilyn, you make a good point because what do we know from people who have long deployments? What do they come home with?
Oh, PTSD,
PTSD.
all sorts
You
of,
just made a
my
really,
ex-husband.
really important point there.
Yeah,
Demonstrating
so
really what
that
drives
is
Burnout.
different. It's a huge,
Yeah.
yeah, definitely not the same. When you're deployed, you
Yeah.
you you don't you have no life. You
Yeah.
really are married to the military.
And
So
that's a great example of emotional exhaustion. And, just
that'd be an interesting study though. Like I never even thought about, doing a study with military and anything like that. But
mhm.
I can only imagine it'd be similar results as far as like burnout, especially during
Yeah.
deployment.
So, gosh, you know what? We're almost at 45 minutes. We like to keep these to 45 minutes, but there's so much more I wanted to get through. So, just real quick, Greg, what's your big so what? Like,
All
why
right.
is this
So
so important?
my research, the third arm of my research, and an article that I just recently published in the American College of Lifestyle Medicine, was looking at burnout and lifestyle. And so I took a lifestyle inventory and I took the burnout inventory and I just did simple correlations with them. And lo and behold, there was 100% correlation across all 12 factors.
Wow.
Um, the data was insanely compelling. That
Mhm.
lifestyle and burnout were clinically related constructs. So my theory going in was that occupational burnout didn't have anything to do with work, or less to do with burnout and more to do with your lifestyle and how you were showing up to work, and less to do with what was happening to you at work, because we're very well trained to do the things that were at work. It had more to do with other factors, that contributed to your overall health and wellness. And so it really, physicians need to look at less about what they do at work and more about what they're doing in what I refer to as the other 128 hours. Okay. And so burnout
Fascinating.
is not a problem of occupation. It's a problem of the other 128 hours. It's what are you doing with the rest of your life that is contributing to your capacity to do your job. And there was a recent book that was published, that really shed a little bit of light on this and kind of looked at burnout from a professional athlete standpoint. Professional athletes come up through the minors, and so if they are talented enough to make the majors, but they're no longer doing the things that they need to do. So they're not sleeping, they're not having good nutrition habits, they're not having good training habits, they have poor lifestyle, they're drinking a lot, they're doing things that aren't contributing to their overall performance. What happens to them? They wash out, right? They wash out. They are no longer able to perform their duties at work, as a result of, not because of their innate athletic ability, but because of they are not doing the things to support them. And so he in the book actually said that, burnout is really a washout. That's really
What
what's
is the name of
occurring
the
in the
book?
situation.
What is the name
It's
of the book?
called Battling Healthcare Burnout by Tom Mayer.
Okay.
It's a really compelling read that really looks at it, but one of his chapters is really on that kind of spoke to this point a little bit of saying that really it's just we're just not doing the things that we need to do in order to perform those things, and so you need to come into work well rested. That's the number one thing. You need to come into it with the rest of your life supporting you doing a really hard job, right? And so our ability to perform in our life is directly congruent with how well you perform at work. You can't, nothing happens in isolation, right? All these things are definitely connected. And so my theory was that burnout is a lifestyle disorder, and my research supported that. And so I came up with a hierarchy of things that physicians need to do in order to look at burnout and how to effectively manage it. And it's like the hierarchy of needs. And
Mhm.
at the base of my pyramid is sleep. Absolutely, 100%. You cannot get to the higher levels of performance and health and human performance without having adequate sleep. If you're not spending 7 hours, 8 hours a night sleeping on a consistent basis, then you are setting yourself up for failure. The next level on that is nutrition, right? You don't have to eat a pristine diet. You don't have to do all this stuff, but you can't subsist on Cheetos. You can't subsist on Coke. You can't just eat because it no longer supports your overall health and wellness, right? And so above that is physical activity, and that includes strength training, weight training, or strength training that includes cardiovascular activity. You don't have to be a triathlete. You don't have to go out and do these dumb things. It is simple walking, that sort of thing.
Whatever fits your
It's
lifestyle. I like to say whatever
yeah,
fits
no,
your
it doesn't
lifestyle.
it doesn't
Yeah.
matter what it is. You just have
Right.
to get
You
out
just
and
have
do
to move.
something that's
Anything is
that's
better
not
than
sitting on the
nothing.
couch.
Right.
Yes, and all these things kind of feed back on one another because it's the cognitive portion, it's the emotional portion of it, it's the mental health things that go along with it. So your physical health is better if you sleep. Your psychological health is better when you sleep. Your emotional health is better when you sleep. Your performance is better when you sleep. Same thing when you eat a good diet, right? It doesn't matter what the diet is. You can argue all you want about the Mediterranean diet or being vegan. It doesn't matter what it is, as long as you're doing something that's very sound and it's meeting your needs. You just need to make sure that your nutrition is on point. You need to make sure that your physical activity is meeting what we know is going to be the minimal standard, which is that 150 minutes of moderate activity a week. And then the next level of my hierarchy is your sense of community. What are you doing with outside of your occupation? This can be your family. How well are you connected with your spouse? How well are you involved in the community? And that's where, for me, physical activity it creates a big component of that. Just this morning, I got up, I went to the gym. I have three other guys that I work out with every single day. We laugh and joke and we get our work done. So I'm killing multiple birds with one stone in that situation. I have multiple groups that I'm involved in, and I have a lot of community around you. That gives you a big sense of purpose, gives you emotional strength. It gives you, it helps you out all the way around. So community is a huge thing. And only after you have successfully addressed those four things can you get to the self-actualized peak of the pyramid, which is where you find purpose. We're all looking for purpose in what we do, and
Yeah,
you're full.
Maslow calls it self-actualization, Maslow's
Yeah,
hierarchy of needs. So we're all
that's
striving
the
to
only
get
point.
to self-actualization.
But
I,
we're all struggling with that to
I
get to
want to,
that without addressing the sleep issue or
yes,
the exercise issue or things along those lines.
I
So
want to ask you, I want to make sure, I don't want to interrupt, the hierarchy, but I want to ask you this question about, because our platform, we originally, started this podcast to help PhD students. And as we talked about today about medical students, and I'm wondering when you're a PhD student or a medical student, most are younger. I mean, I happen to go back at a little bit older age, Marilyn too. Um, I wonder if you don't necessarily have these structures in place, like you're talking about, for your lifestyle habits, and you let these things take over your life, right? You don't learn how to set boundaries. You don't learn how to, you're the first person who ever taught me about non-negotiable time. And we've talked about it on our podcast multiple times. And I remember the first time I heard it, I was like, wow, that sounds super selfish. And I was like, no, that's called boundary setting. That's called protecting your health. That's called, protecting yourself from burnout and emotional exhaustion, all these kind of things. So I'm just kind of thinking, researcher, hypothesizing in my head, maybe, like you're saying, it's not occupational, it's lifestyle, but maybe PhD students, and maybe this is, for strategy, don't let it take over your life. Remember to keep structure in your life and set boundaries so that you get good sleep. So, I mean, I remember starting assignments at 9 o'clock at night. right? Because that was the only quiet time
Always.
I had, right? And it just took over my life. And thanks to, Greg, you taught me a lot about how to put that structure and boundaries back into your life to get the train, on the right track. So it's interesting. I mean, I think, and then this can apply to anybody listening to our podcast today. Whatever you're going through in your life, we're in trying times as a society.
Ugh.
We always say ask for help, number one. We always say that every week. Whatever you're going through, allow yourself to ask for help. There are people out there who want to help you, want you to be successful, and want you to succeed.
And
Set,
I feel like you can do like this pyramid that you've built. I feel like because I always bring it back to training, but I'm
yeah,
like, 'cause I've got a friend that she's doing a 100-mile run this weekend, next weekend. But she's like had my birthday party. She's like, nope, can't eat that. Nope, I'm not drinking right now. She brought herself her coconut water. But it's the same. If you use those same, like we always say, your health and what we talk about on here for the PhD journey, we can always, you throw it to any aspect of your life. But as a triathlete, especially like you can't do an Ironman with no sleep, crap diet, and not getting out there and training, right? Like you just
getting happy
can't.
hours at night. You
Yeah,
just
no more happy hours in it.
scream. I don't,
So
I personally do not drink because I just don't think it works with
I'm not saying
my
anything.
right? But I just think if you want to be high performing, and listen, everybody gets to make their own choices in their life, but I'm just trying to say it. If you want to be high performing and protect your health, your
Right.
health is your wealth. It's a luxury. It's absolutely a luxury, and we
But I
should.
bet people don't even look at this and say, oh, this is what, is not going to cause burnout. Like we know now, like especially now, I wrote a visual while you were saying it because I think it's a great visual. But I'm just like, wow. And then just put like, this is how you prevent burnout. But
Yeah,
people need that. Like people need to understand that it's not just one thing. Like you said, it's not just the job, how you show up at the job. So I think for our listeners today, like, when you're listening to this, write it down, look at that visual and be like, do, and however you need to do it and fit it into your life. But this was great. Like I really appreciate you explaining that today and showing for me like the visual. I'm like, oh, okay, now I get it.
well,
Yeah, it really doesn't matter. It really doesn't matter what you're applying it to. And so
Right,
I think that we have these core pillars of life, of health and wellness. We know that exercise and stress management and nutrition and sleep, we know all these things
right,
create are what we need to create balance. If your life is not balanced, you need to take a look at some of the core tenets of health and wellness. You need to figure out where your deficiencies lies, come up with a good plan, understand that there's a compounding effect. Right? You're very unlikely to be able to hit your exercise goals if you're not sleeping, right? We
yeah,
all are tired and we wake up after 3 hours of sleep, or maybe that's just me. And it's like, I don't have the energy to exercise today. And then that parlays itself into, wow, I could probably that whatever it is. I'm not making good food choices. I can tell you that right now.
right.
And I don't really want to be around people. And so now you've entered into this spiral where you start to kind of no longer thrive. That's really what the core of burnout is. You're no longer thriving. And so our goal for everybody and what everybody wants to do is they want to thrive.
Yes.
But you
yes.
can't expect people to thrive in an environment that doesn't support that. And so
That's a great
these
quote.
are
That's our
very
quote.
very specific, very basic things that if you asked anybody on the street the importance of sleep, the importance of exercise, the importance of good nutrition, they're probably going to be able to give you some fairly sound understanding of how those things affect your life, but that doesn't mean they're doing them. And so these
Right.
things are simple, but they're not easy,
And
right?
they have to take
And
an
so
inventory. I say it all the time. Take an inventory of what it is that you're going through in life, and then you'll find out where you need to make the tweaks, why you're feeling the way you feel. And I love the thriving because that's my whole social media is thriving as we age.
We have an
So
episode, survive, thrive beyond surviving. So
Yes.
we're,
Burnout is surviving.
yeah,
Burnout is
you're right.
surviving.
Burn is surviving. You're
The
talking about
opposite of
thriving.
burnout is
Yeah,
thriving.
I love that.
Really,
Love
that's really what it is. And so we're all just trying to get there. And I love the idea of the inventory. What I try to teach my clinicians, what I try to teach a lot of my people is when they think about burnout, stop looking at your external factors. Stop looking at your job. Stop blaming it on your spouse. Stop blaming it on other people. Get out a mirror. Get out a mirror, take some personal responsibility for your own health, your own wellness, start doing the things that we know that work. And miraculously, after just a short period of time and putting your attention where it really needs to be, suddenly the cloud starts to lift, right? And that's
I
really
love
what we're
that.
looking for.
I
It's
love
that
that. And
simple. It's
let
really
me,
that simple.
all right, listen, here's what I would love to do. Greg, if you would like to come back on, I think we should further this conversation. I think there's so much around it.
Absolutely.
We haven't even really taught people like what it happens physiologically, in the body. Um, so I would love to just continue this conversation. So we'll have you back in the future. If that would be
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
Excellent.
It
Okay.
was just
Be
And
a
I
fun.
time.
just and Marilyn always knows I love the quote that you said, but I always kind of have to add with, one little quote to the episode. And I found this one. We always talk about the spark, right? You ready for this one?
Okay.
Find your sparkle, right? I'm so drawn to the sparkle. I see it everywhere in the water. I don't know. It's just crazy. Anyhow, your spark can only shine if you protect the flame. Fuel it with rest, joy, and balance. And I think that's exactly what we were talking about today.
Perfect.
We're so grateful, Greg, to have had you on this episode.
Yes.
Your intelligence and just your knowledge is unmatched, and we'd love to have you back. Next
Very
week,
inspirational.
yes, next week we're moving on to episode 19. We're having Laura Rossetti and her story. She's heading to the Women's Championship in Kona in October. She's been away from it since 2018. She's going to race at age 70. You talk
Wow.
about, managing your lifestyle, right? She's got a great story. She's had a lot of setbacks, but she's going for it. And it's a story of resilience and hard work and dedication. And I think that I think I'm going to ask her too about burnout and how did she, because we didn't even talk about that training at that high of a level for like the Ironman, which you've done 16.
Mind blowing.
How do you not suffer burnout, physically from that level of activity? So such a great conversation. I wish we could go on longer. Is there anything,
Well,
Marilyn?
Thanks
let's
for
pick
having
your
us.
brain some
Oh,
more.
we loved having you. Thank you so much. And Marilyn, come on, final words. You always,
Oh my gosh.
I always put you on the spot.
Yeah, no, the thriving. You said it, but you said the opposite of Dr. Gibbons. What did you say? The opposite of burnout is thriving.
Right.
Yeah,
Mhm.
so I think that like we
Burnout
need
is surviving. Taking control of your lifestyle is thriving.
because I definitely want to continue to thrive. I just hit 50 and I'm like, it's not over for me. I'm gonna have so much fun. But now, and I've been a trainer for years and I'm a triathlete in my fun little way. But like it's not over. Like I think people hit that age and like, oh, here we go, give me my rocking chair. But you put it like I love the visual. I love the how you talked about it, how you put it all together. And so I think, yes, thrive. We're all gonna thrive. We're all gonna thrive.
Amen.
Thank,
Wonderful. Thank
thank
you,
you
guys.
so much for
All
Um,
right.
being on today. All right, guess we'll see you all next week.
okay. Thank you. All right.
Bye,
Bye-bye.
everybody. Much
Bye.
love.
Thank you.